Returning to our story, Anne and Mike Lux have described the difficulties of raising their adopted daughters. But what was it like for Sandy and Julie? And what explains the starkly different roads the two sisters have traveled? The Luxes finally learned the horrifying details about Sandy's early years. Here again, Margaret Larson.
Two sisters, born just a year apart and raised together, today live very different lives.
Are you having fun?
Julie is 26, a wife and mother of two young boys, leading a quiet life in a suburban neighborhood. But Sandy, who disappears so often her parents occasionally report her missing, is at 27 a prostitute and drug addict. Why did one sister's life go so disastrously off track? Their parents believe one answer was buried in the girl's medical files, something they didn't find out for years.
I think that the deck was stacked against Sandy very early on, and at a point where her experiences were really pretty much beyond her control.
Sandy says one of her psychiatrists told her that she had been physically traumatized as a young child, treated for a fractured skull and broken ribs before her adoption, and he suspected she'd been sexually abused as well. Whatever abuse Julie had suffered appeared less severe, and unlike her sister, she had no memory of anything before her life with the Luxes. What's your first memory of being with them?
It'd be about, I guess, I don't know how old I'd be. I was making mud pies in the sandbox.
She also recalls doing troubling things she still can't figure out, like stockpiling food in her bedroom.
Sandy and I had talked about this, taking food up there and storing it.
Why do you think you might have done something like that?
Probably just afraid we weren't going to get to eat again.
What do you remember about school?
I loved school. I was terrible at school, but I did like school.
Were you concerned about your grades?
Yes, I really wanted to make good grades, and it just didn't seem like I could.
Julie remembers feeling intense pressure from her parents about school performance and being in trouble much of the time. What she doesn't remember is the kind of affection that seemed to flow so naturally to the biological kids. And that's a memory that still hurts.
I was really depressed growing up as a teenager. I didn't understand why I wasn't good enough for the Lux family.
Sandy didn't understand either. When we found her, she was still on the streets and still angry about her upbringing. She agreed to talk to us only about her childhood. What do you remember about coming to live with the Luxes? Do you remember the day you got there?
Yeah, I remember. I knew it was permanent, and I didn't, I wasn't happy with it.
The little girl who dumped sand all over the yard and seemed not to hear anyone knew her biological mother was gone for good.
You know, I guess as a kid you just feel for your mother, whatever, you know what I'm saying? And I knew that it was permanent. You know, I wasn't, you know, she wasn't coming.
When you met the other kids, what'd you think about them?
Intimidated.
By what?
That this wasn't where I belonged.
She was the child who didn't want anyone to touch her, the one who violently rocked herself to sleep.
It like soothed me. I guess that was my way of giving myself affection that I felt I should have gotten.
As a teenager, she says she was constantly under attack.
Criticism, nonstop criticism.
Made you feel bad about yourself?
Yeah, I didn't live up to their standards.
In school?
I deliberately messed up in school. Because that was the one thing that I knew they really cared for, you know?
What do you wish you'd had growing up that you didn't have?
A mother.
A mother who, after years of guilt, anger, and pain, has written it all out in a book that is both an apology to her girls and a plea to other adoptive parents.
Accept your children. They are not going to do what you want, and you might even be right, but they're not going to do it, except...
She talks a lot about feeling very guilty, feeling like she didn't come through as a mom for you and Sandy. Do you think she did?
She supplied a lot of things for us that we didn't have and we probably wouldn't have had. But then again, you know, I think the most thing that we needed the most was love, and we didn't really have that. Love you.
So Julie's made sure it's something her own boys never lack.
Big hug.
Big hug. I tell my kids every night I love them, and I make sure that they know without a doubt that I love them, and I do anything for them.
Anne's book about their lives set off a flood of angry letters from Julie, filled with accusations, but eventually with understanding.
The dialogue has never stopped. It goes on. It's what saved us.
For Julie, the dialogue was enough to bring her home. Last year, she and her family moved back to South Bend to be closer to Anne and Mike. But it was the next generation, Julie's children, who closed the gap between them.
Julie told me that she has a chance to watch the mother I would have been for her through the grandmother I am with her children.
She's excellent. I can't think of anything that I would want her to change. Not a thing.
With one adopted daughter, finally, a bond as tight as blood. Do you feel like they love you?
Yes.
And do you love them?
Yes, very much. I feel like they're my parents.
But with another daughter, separation and continued heartache.
I feel like really this book is her way of trying to fix up and perfect, like she does everything else, you know, make herself feel better.
She said she wrote the book in part as an apology to you and Julie. Did you take it that way?
No. No.
You don't believe that?
It was written for her to, you know, succeed in the one thing she failed at, you know?
There are faint glimmers of hope for Sandy's life. For 8 months last year, she cleaned up, got a job, and came home for the holidays. But then it all fell apart. She was back on the streets with her mom and dad worrying once again.
I'm afraid of losing her. I'm afraid she'll die or be killed.
Since our interview with Sandy, she was arrested for a parole violation. She's now locked up in the county jail, awaiting a trial that could send her to prison for up to 4 years. So why did an adoption that started out with such high hopes cause so much pain? Did the girls' behavior make them unlovable? Were their parents too idealistic or naive about adding to their biological family?
If I adopted 2 kids, I don't know how I could love them as much as my kids. I think you'd have to. It takes time.
I think they thought it would be easy. I think they thought that all kids were like theirs. Sorry we weren't, you know, like you planned.
23 years ago, Anne and Mike believed childhood trauma was erasable. Now they wonder if the girls' abuse set behavior in motion that the most devoted parenting couldn't change.
I think there are ways in which we could have been better parents, but I don't know that the results would have been dramatically different.
For Anne, there is acceptance now of the limits of hope and an answer, finally, to a question she once dreaded, a question a young Julie asked repeatedly years ago.
Are you glad you adopted us, Mom? Are you glad you adopted us, Mom? Are you glad you adopted us, Mom? Are you glad you... She would not let me go because she knew I couldn't answer that question the way she wanted me to. But I can answer it now. And yes, I'm glad, Julie.
The agency that handled the Lux adoption told Dateline it couldn't comment because of confidentiality concerns. And the Welfare Department says the case happened too long ago to track down the facts. But both agencies say it's their policy to give adoptive parents full information, as long as it doesn't reveal the birth parent's identity. If you're thinking of adopting an older child, here is some advice from adoption experts. Keep asking questions. Even if they produce painful answers, the more you know early, the better prepared you'll be for any problems that might arise later. and ask for a written report of the child's history and review it with your doctor.